nobody can access his computer. Things start shutting off. They're waiting for the locks while the raptors are coming.
What happens if we lose power here? Few people did die while they were going out there. Hey everyone, Dan Gunter from Insane Forensics. Welcome back to Tech Talk Tuesday, where every week we try to do something to help your threat hunting and security program. And today we are joined by Sam Becker from the awesome Insane Forensics marketing team. So welcome, Sam.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be a guest on Tech Talk, especially today's episode.
Marketing is a fun place at Insane Forensics. I mean, there's cases to wear temporary tattoos of upcoming stickers, fun working through it. So it's always exciting to see Sam on this side because you see Sam on the other side on LinkedIn and a lot of the other stuff we do. But it's great to have you out front, Sam.
Yeah, I'm excited to return to some live casting, some video things so that I can talk about something that I'm super excited about and something that you're super excited about. So today's episode is a little different from our normal Tech Talks. We are going to talk through a hypothetical situation in the terms of the film Jurassic Park. And we're going to talk about the OT implications of that movie, how it could have been crisis avoided, and just kind of go through some of the things that we saw from an OT perspective that could have been better. So, Dan, do you want to give a summary of Jurassic Park if anybody hasn't seen it in the 30 years that it's been out?
So Jurassic Park came out in 1993. So like you said, 31 years ago. It's based off a Michael Crichton book, and there's undertones to it on, is it responsible to clone? Is it responsible to do certain things, right? But from like a cybersecurity perspective, right, you have what's called, in the movie, it's basically outlining the catastrophe that took place out on this island where they're trying to clone dinosaurs, right? And throughout the movie, you have, the operator of the island trying to run kind of this theme park of dinosaurs, having visitor center, having the cages, bringing raptors and T-Rexes back to life based on kind of samples that are there. You have investors that are coming in and saying, hey, we're skeptical on this, right? And so the whole movie is basically the investors coming in being like, before our investor invests on this, we want to make sure from the insurance side, it's good. A lot of people kind of miss that as they're just watching the movie. And as the movie takes place, what's interesting is you have a bunch of catastrophic conditions that we'll talk through, right? From insider threat to failure of critical control systems and building systems that result in door locks being opened and chaos going in, right? So from a cybersecurity perspective, it's really great movie actually to do a case study off, even if you are kind of away from the topic of, should we clone dinosaurs, right?
Yeah. So before we get into the cybersecurity side of things, my first question is, would you go, if Jurassic Park was a real place, would you go to it?
I mean, they would have to fix the issues that we clearly saw, If you knew about kind of what happened in the movie, you would obviously want to see like, hey, did they actually get, some of the operational issues there fixed? Absolutely would be a cool place to go to. And actually, if you ever get the chance to go out to Hawaii, you can actually do, helicopter rides over Kauai and some of the other places that they shot the movie. I know in Honolulu, you can go to where that Gallimimus scene is, where they have like the flock of animals going. And so absolutely, the concept of Jurassic Park's beautiful. If you go to Hawaii, you can actually see a lot of the places that shot at, right? Across a few of the islands.
Cool. I too would 100% go. OT issues aside, I think I would still go because it would be really cool. Okay, so let's get into kind of the problems that we see, in my rewatch of this. It's funny because the OT stuff doesn't come up until you're like, 30, 40 minutes in. But if we start off by talking about kind of what systems do we see that are kind of like OT, industrial control type things?
Building management systems, right? Because the whole concept of, hey, we're going to clone these like dangerous animals and we're going to bring them back to life. And, early in the movie, right, there's that question of, is it actually ethical to bring, these creatures that are like super predators back to life, right? And so whether you're running a park full of super predatory creatures or whether you're running, a refinery with stuff like benzene, or you're running a mine with hydrochloric acid or some other danger, right? One of the big things, right, is you have computers that are driving things that are keeping keeping people safe, things that are keeping people from getting eaten by dinosaurs. You go through the movie and you see the failure, right? From door locks failing, not having redundant backups, to, the operational sense of they have to go out to the maintenance shed and they're like, oh, if we reboot this system, will the park come back up? You probably should know if the park's going to come back up if you're like, hey, let me turn off the systems. And so, from a few perspectives, from the technology perspective, from the like, okay, are the fences and door locks and computer systems and how I operate this going to work, right? And that's even before you touch the insider threat issue of having one computer guy that in the movie, right, he has financial problems, right? Things that a lot of employers look at in background checks, right? Should you have that one guy running the network when, he has those problems?
Yeah, so let's dive into the character of Nedry a little bit. He's the one guy that's kind of doing all of the control systems from right off the bat. He's like, I bid this super low. Nobody else would have done it for this amount. So clearly, like you said, he's got some financial issues going on. So let's talk about the risks of that and how to kind of mitigate those. If you were John Hammond running Jurassic Park, how you could have avoided that like one person scenario.
A lot of people are like, hey, why would you do a background check? And then, there's the question of if you get a negative background check back, like what is actually the threshold for being like, hey, maybe we shouldn't bring this person on, right? And in the case of the movie, Nedry was going to take the sample, so he created malware, was going to take the cloning sample to one of their competitors. I think he was only going to get paid like $1.5 million or something dollars in there. So sizable amount when you have financial problems. Comparatively, I mean, you go into US history and you look at like Aldrich Ames, one of the biggest U.S. spies for the CIA from decades ago. He was paid around $2 million too, right? And so there's kind of this issue of when people have motivating factors, whether it be financial or whether they're kind of upset internally, you have to look at that, right, as an employer, and you have to kind of build your operations around that. That's the second part of it, is they needed Nedry actually to run the island. And Nedry's work wasn't actually being audited. It didn't seem like to any meaningful level, right? And so not just making sure you're getting reliable people that might not have issues, but also making sure, hey, what can we do to make sure that if someone does go rogue, if we do have an insider threat scenario, that it doesn't result in the chaos that we saw later in the movie.
Yeah, kind of the catalyst for like the kickoff to this is that he sets off that, that malware, and nobody can access his computer. Things start shutting off. I think he describes it as like he's debugged the phone, so he's got to run a system update, and then the security cameras go offline so that he can sneak around. What kind of fail safes should people be putting into their OT systems so that one person can't override an entire park's security or safety protocols?
Yeah, so I mean, this is more general IT knowledge, but you can do this in OT too, like separation of powers, right? Again, making sure there's the redundant people there, bringing in people to audit systems and see, hey, how do they actually work? One of the challenges in there, right, is Nedry actually did write the malware that he kicked off that gave him, I think in the book, it was like he needed 18 minutes. And, because, right, his boat was waiting at the dock to take him away. So he was kind of time pushed before he met his demise, right? But it's trying to also be ready for that situation, right? He obviously was an administrator, so making sure people have the right admin access to their box would be one thing, right? In his case, though, he probably would have higher levels of admin access, right? But a lot, again, comes down to redundancy of you're running this big park, you have a lot of big investment coming in. So it's making sure you have control so that if your human control fails and your human becomes an insider, that either you detect it quickly or they don't even have the power to do what they need to do, right? Unfortunately, in his case, though, and this is true to a lot of plants, he's kind of a one-person shop.
Yeah, so we talked about this movie being, 30 plus years old, and there's a lot of nostalgia in it. If you, grew up in this era, there's a lot of, MS-DOS looking screens and, putting the cursors in the right place. There's the iconic, we prefer to be called hackers, and that there's these Unix systems. And so if we think about it, I assume that things like that don't exist anymore, but I know that there's some really critical, infrastructure pieces that are still operating on systems like that. So, how do you protect those types of things if maybe they aren't kind of caught up to the current like phase of programming that we're in?
It's a great question. And I mean, the unfortunate truth is there's still really bad human machine interfaces out there. And in the movie, right, like they had this like box flying through. She was like, Unix system, I know this. Let me like click on it to access the file and do things. And so
That's basically what programming is, right? Like that's
yeah. But from the usability perspective, I mean, you want to make sure it's functional and you can do the core things you need to do at the time. And, it's good in the movie that a kid was able to kind of figure that out on the fly. But we go real world, right? And, bringing up actually a case that happened a few years ago. I think it was the USS John McCain ran into another ship. And what had happened was on their computer system on the same interface, it was a newer interface that the people were using. And they thought actually they were controlling the engines and turning the thrust levels down. Well, they didn't know actually how to operate the interface. And so they didn't realize they had turned the engines up, I think, instead of down. And they actually ran into another Navy ship, caused a bunch of damage. I think some people might have been seriously injured or died out of that and caused kind of a big issue, right? And so to the point, a good learning point there is not just, you got to make sure, right, it's usable in the time it can be used in and by people that should. Again, it was kind of impressive in the movie that she was able to figure it out on the fly.
Yeah, exactly. She works great under pressure. I hope she got a great job after Jurassic Park, after surviving all of that. Okay, so you talked earlier about how that there's like this physical versus, cyber world. So like one example that happens in the movie is like they're waiting for the locks while the raptors are coming, and the locks have to get turned back on before you can actually like activate them. What's a way to have kind of this balance between, okay, yes, we want to be high tech and we want to have things controlled, but also to have this physical override in the event of an emergency?
Yeah, this is an interesting area just to kind of bring it to the real world, right? In a few situations. In the movie, what it comes down to is, again, you have critical building control systems that are keeping people safe from a lot of dangerous things, right? And kind of bring this into the current age and current situation, right? Go to a hospital, right? Go back to the beginning of COVID when we had a disease that we didn't know what it was, right? We didn't know a lot about it. We were putting people on floors of hospitals. We were kind of isolating and saying, hey, we're hoping that the HVAC systems in these hospitals can help people with this. Obviously, COVID now is a little more treatable. We know how to treat it. It's not as big of an issue, right? But there's research labs out there that are doing research on Ebola, right? They're doing research on other places, right? Most towns, most major cities still do have TB wards and other places that rely on critical systems to keep people safe or keep people from getting in a worse condition that they already are, right? And so, in the movie, we're talking about, hey, maybe your door locks shouldn't just automatically turn off. Maybe they need a little more of a generator or a backup system to where you don't have to like wander out to the maintenance shed that you have to drive through and drive past the raptor cage that looked like the raptors got out, right? And then you meet them in there, right? But again, it comes down to having the better operational side, but at the same time being like, okay, and this is where tabletopping and tabletop scenarios comes in. What happens if we lose power here? Because in the movie, right, we see when she's Unix system, I know this, like they're trying to get the shotgun to like shut the door and everything, right? And it just showed like, again, a stream of failures that there probably should have been a little more planning around on making sure that, again, the systems that control those door locks and others, they don't go down if other stuff goes down, right? I'm going to get last thing on that is back to the point of, okay, great, they went out to the maintenance shed, they rebooted the park, but again, they were even concerned if it would come back up. It didn't sound like they really knew or had thought through kind of that scenario as they were going through. And maybe the right people just weren't there. Maybe we only saw the 6 or 7 people along the way, but I think in the movie, a few people did die while they were going out there.
Yeah. So you talked about tabletopping, and a part of this movie is the Dr. Ian Malcolm whole chaos theory. Basically, if it can go wrong, it will go wrong. I'm oversimplifying that. But, to that point, what kinds of things do you think that they could have done in advance of, obviously, this was before it was opening to the public. So it was kind of a test run, like you said, for the investors. This was essentially due diligence, which seems a little late, to be honest. You're this far into it and you're just doing due diligence now. But what kinds of things do you think that they could have done to prepare for this better, or to prepare for kind of those unknown scenarios?
It it didn't seem like they had any plan at all up to that time. And so having, disaster recovery plan, actually having a response plan, maybe they did. And, it just, you don't show it in a movie because that's not kind of a cool thing to show. At the same time, like no one knew what they were doing when stuff was happening. And so from that side again, right, it's the planning side. It's some of the core things going into it that you can be ready when that happens, right? From the redundancy, from the operational side, they probably should have worked with vendors and others to work down some of those scenarios. And it sounds like there was some engineering failures, if you will, and the design of that too, right? So having the cyber people work with the engineering team, right? Working through those scenarios, right? Because, and this is true today, right? You have a lot of engineers that are really good at their field of engineering. They don't always think of security the way that a security person will think about it, right? And so that's where when we talk about like IT/OT divide, or we talk about the divide even between security teams and the ops teams, like, again, we're reading into this on a movie, but it didn't seem like that was there based on there being a new park. And to your point, them wanting to open soon and them having Jeff Goldblum as the mathematician that's basically helping the insurance company who's there kind of adjust it. Jeff got eaten, so maybe it got approved through. I don't think it did, right?
Yeah. Going back to kind of incident response planning, is there a difference, or is there, maybe a different path if you're talking about an internal threat actor versus an external threat actor? Are there differences that you should take into consideration when you're doing your IR planning?
So I think you certainly do. And, it's really where the threat kind of starts. A lot of people are like, oh, hey, no one will be able to get into here. This won't happen. And so some people kind of create M&M level of security, right? Where it's hard on the outside, kind of soft on the inside, right? And so to that point, it's really watching the assumptions you make, right? It's not assuming that you're going to get someone with bad intent, but at the same time being like, okay, let's play this scenario out. Let's be ready for this, right? And today there's a lot more insider threats that we kind of see across the last decade or two, right? And so, but not being scared to kind of dig down that and not just saying, oh, well, that couldn't happen here, which you hear a lot, right? A lot of people are like, oh, that'll never happen here, right?
Yeah. To kind of wrap up or summarize some of the things that went wrong that could have been better, you're looking at human error, you're looking at kind of an overconfidence level and a lack of planning. You've got this weather component, which we didn't even touch on, which could have also factored in on the systems as well. We focus kind of mostly on that human error and that human element here. But, having kind of fail safes in place, having checks and balances in place so that one person doesn't have all the power literally to shut off the power to a park. And endanger a lot of people. So one thing I think we have to touch on is that the ongoing kind of bit from John Hammond throughout it is that he spared no expense. He's got his top chefs and he's got top of the line stuff. He's, all of this. He clearly spared some expense in, systems and security. How could he have invested more in those areas?
Yeah. So again, to the people, process, technology, he should have invested in all three. We'll start with the people side, right? The Nedry issue, the like making sure people actually know what they're doing, the training issue of what you have. It did not seem to be a sophisticated operation from a people sense with controls and safeguards in there, right? And so from the people sense, again, and we hit it before, it's the try to make people redundant where possible. So you have, some room to have people either be controls or safeguards against each other. And you also can be like, hey, if you see something, say something type deal, right? From the process perspective, again, to the beating the point on, there wasn't a whole lot of process, If you can't do it internally, and sparing no expense, you really should bring in a third party or even a third party to kind of make sure that your procedure actually matches what's going on in the field, right? And especially before you have dinosaurs in there. They should have started not based on when it opened, but when they started hatching dinosaurs out, right? That isn't like, hey, we'll make it super unsafe for workers, and then when people show up, we'll care, right? Or when the insurance, when Jeff Goldblum shows up for his chaos theory and the insurance calculations, right? And, from the technology side, again, just working to actually make sure that even if you have components like your electric fence, like your door locks, like your network, like all the other parts, that they're a cohesive part of the plan and that they can withstand all of the issues we saw in the movies, right? Obviously, no one has an unlimited budget, but there was a lot that they could have learned in there.
Yeah, absolutely. This was certainly the first time that I've looked at Jurassic Park through that lens. This is one of my favorite movies. I've seen it a ton. And so this was the first time that I sat down and took notes watching it so that I could prepare for through that kind of OT industrial, building control lens. Yeah. Do you have any other takeaways that you want to touch on before we kind of wrap up here?
No, it's a great movie. And I think the first movie is a better case study than some of the other movies that we won't cover here. But no, I mean, I think it's a great movie. Really the case to where you have critical operations, you have life safety, you have all of the things that we talk about in industrial cybersecurity. And then you have this like very hard problem of, again, we have these super predatory creatures. And so it's an entertaining movie. It's a movie. So in a few weeks, if you're watching this, part of this is leading up to a movie night we're doing. So for S4, which is a big conference in Miami Beach, industrial cybersecurity one, in a few weeks in South Beach, we're going to be having a movie night and showing Jurassic Park. And so this conversation's kind of leading up in a case study going into that. We hope you'll be there. It's a free event. There'll be transportation from the S4 hotel to Lowe's. We have buses that'll run every 15 to 30 minutes between the venue, free food. You can actually win a Jurassic Park Lego set there. Should be a good time. But yeah, I mean, it really just is a great movie for industrial cybersecurity when you, to your point, take that professional lens to it, right?
Definitely. Yeah. Well, this was a great discussion. I think that you're right. This is a great case study on, OT. It's kind of a fun way of looking at it, but there's real world implications to it and takeaways that we can have as well. We hope to see you guys at the event in Miami. I think it's going to be a great night. And if worst case, you just get to watch a great movie, even if you don't look at it, of what you can take away for your OT program.
And we know families are coming, so bring your family if they're in town. Bring a friend or two if they're in town. There's still a lot of room.
Well, thanks for tuning in, and we will see you guys next week for our next Tech Talk.
Have a good one, everyone.